Well, it's been a hell of a week for the Conservative Party. First of all, the budget shambles, matching the pasty tax omni-shambles, presided over by George, or should I say Gideon Osborne, about whom much more later. Philip Hammond, who I hear you say across the land, the erstwhile Chancellor of the Exchequer, though not for much longer, if you ask me, is responsible for putting the Tories in yet another hole. His flagship policy in his budget of this week was ditched within 72 hours. Even the pasty tax lasted longer than that. The pasty would still have been warm if it had been aborted, thrown by the Chancellor as quickly as this one has. Just to recap, he introduced a tax rise on the self-employed, on the one-man business, one-woman business, taxi drivers, small companies that we're always told are the engine of our economy, in flat and brazen defiance of the Conservative Party's election manifesto of just 2 years ago, without even appearing to realise that he was doing so. And that speaks not very highly of him, but it speaks even less highly of the vegetables sat around the cabinet table and the nodding Prime Minister, who presumably nodded it through. Anyway, the buck didn't stop with her. She promptly, after a flurry of unfortunate headlines in normally Tory-supporting newspapers, to drop it, and he dropped it just seconds before Prime Minister's question time on Wednesday. So, I said 72 hours, it's only a little over 48 hours, actually. It's a record, and we still haven't heard how he's going to fill the £2 billion hole in the budget created by the abandonment of this flagship policy. But if that was all the Tories had to worry about, well, it isn't. And the Electoral Commission has just fined them a record £70,000 and made clear, despite the Prime Minister's attempted obfuscations, that actually they had to go to the High Court to force the governing party of Great Britain to cooperate with the Electoral Commission's investigations into malpractice in their election spending. And that's not all either. No fewer than 12 police forces have now submitted reports to the public prosecuting authorities on the allegation that in specific constituencies, and at least 2 MPs have revealed that they were questioned under caution by the police for many hours last week. That report to the DPP will have to be acted upon. Will the DPP do what the law says if they are found to be guilty? If the charges are proven, will these members of Parliament have to vacate their seats in the House of Commons? If they do, the Tories no longer have a majority. In fact, they'll be in quite a distinct minority, which will change everything in Britain, at least until the by-elections are held. And if those by-elections are held, will the Conservative Party manage to hold the seats? And if they do not, well, we've got a change of government, at least the possibility of a new coalition emerging that doesn't involve the Tories. And if that happens, what happens to Article 50? What happens to Brexit? It's going to be a very interesting year, 2017, just as interesting as 2016 was. And just like London buses, when 3 came along at once, 3 problems came along at once, today we have the mother of all problems. A sense of complacent, arrogant entitlement is the hallmark of the Conservative Party. They are the party of Downton Abbey, at least at a certain level. No one personifies that arrogant sense of entitlement more than Gideon Osborne, though he likes to pretend his name is George. I don't know why he thought we might have some preconceptions about him if he went under his proper Christian name. Gideon Osborne just exudes that arrogant complacency, that sense of entitlement. He must do, mustn't he? Otherwise, he wouldn't have imagined that he could possibly get away with having 6 highly paid and very taxing, if I may put it that way, jobs. He earns £700,000 a year for 4 days a month as a financial advisor to BlackRock. He recorded £650,000 of earnings in the last 12 months as a public speaker, though, having listened to him for free over many years in Parliament, the idea that anyone would pay for the banal, boring verbiage that he dishes up is frankly astounding to me. But £650,000 changed hands into Gideon's paw for his public speaking skills. And then there's his job as a member of Parliament. £75,000 a year in public money. You would have thought that any other person's cup would overfloweth with that kind of largesse. But today he announces that he is to become the full-time editor of the Evening Standard. He didn't put it that way, but to be the editor of an important newspaper with a claimed circulation of 1 million copies a day, that's 5 times the Guardian, that's 3 or 4 times the Daily Telegraph. Well, you think that was a full-time job for anyone, but not for Gideon. Now, I don't blame him for not sniffing at such a post, for not turning up his nose at such an important platform with which he can do a lot of mischief, not least to Theresa May. And I should declare that the owner of the Evening Standard, Evgeny Lebedev, is a friend of mine. He attended my wedding. I knew his father when he was the KGB officer at the Russian embassy in London. But I shouldn't say too much more about that. I don't know why Evgeny Lebedev has given him this post. I don't know if George Osborne even thought for a moment about turning it down. But it speaks volumes about many important features of Britain today. First of all, it makes an absolute mockery of the idea that we have a free press in Britain. A former Tory Chancellor, still a Tory MP, editing an important London newspaper which, frankly, has a big readership in the House of Commons and in the newsrooms of other broadcasters and newspapers. The idea that he is going to be dispassionate about the reporting of important stories, breaking news, the idea that he's going to allow the Evening Standard to hold the Tories to account when he is a Tory grandee to his well-manicured fingertips is frankly ridiculous. Now, I didn't imagine that the last editor, whom I also knew very well, was anything other than a Tory. But you can be a Tory and you can be a pillar, a grandee of the Conservative Party. There is a difference. And the Evening Standard has made many foolish strategic decisions. Backing the Tories in 2015 at the general election, when London was an overwhelmingly Labour city, was a mistake. Backing Zach Goldsmith in his frankly racist campaign against the Labour mayor Sadiq Khan was another strategic mistake in terms of positioning. Although I should say, in parenthesis, that the first man to congratulate George Osborne, the first man to say that the former Chancellor had his best wishes in his new position as Standard editor was Sadiq Khan. Nothing if not flexible, positively gymnastic, in fact. Now, the idea that such a man can be counted on to report fairly on a London which has nothing in common with Downton Abbey. The Evening Standard's preoccupation with the debutantes and dowagers and the very achingly trendy shops of the King's Road was, I thought, a thing of the past. But with George Osborne, Gideon Osborne in charge, very obviously not. London deserves better than that kind of Evening Standard. Now, there's, of course, precedent for this. Boris Johnson and Ian MacLeod and one or two other political grandees have become editors, usually later in life than Gideon, and one or two of them had made a decent stab at it. But these appointments were political investments by the proprietors of these titles. And, sorry to say, Evgeny, my friend, I think you're making a political investment in Gideon Osborne. You're making a political investment in the Conservative Party. And that's a mistake for a newspaper proprietor, to get that close to the political class you're supposed to be reporting on. Or maybe, just maybe, you're making an investment in a politician that you think is not finished and may be coming back sometime soon. And, of course, we'll be talking about Nicola Sturgeon's stab in the back to Britain by the announcement just on the day that Article 50 was passed in the House of Commons. A big, giant spanner was thrown into the works. And Nicola Sturgeon is demanding, pretty damn quick, a referendum because Britain's leaving the European Union. Well, it would be utterly wrong, entirely wrong, for the British state to demand that the Scots don't have a referendum, even though it's scarcely a once-in-a-generation thing these days. That would be completely wrong. If Theresa May had said there will be no referendum, then I would be utterly opposed to that stance. But it's also reasonable for Theresa May to say, well, you can have a second referendum, but it'll have to be after Brexit, because it's Brexit that you say is the reason for the referendum. You say you don't want to be part of Britain outside the European Union. Well, unless the Scots are going to be voting in a referendum on things they can't know about, well, you'll have to wait and see what it looks like once we've left the European Union. And, by the way, we might not even be leaving the European Union. If the Tories lose all their seats, lose their majority in the House of Commons, who knows what's going to happen? So it's distinctly premature to hold another referendum on Scottish independence, even though the Scots have a right to a referendum on their position in the European Union and the right to negotiate the timing of it. Now, when I knew Jerry Hayes, he was a youthful live wire member of Parliament. Now he's a sage, a commentator, a man, a national treasure, in fact, and he joins us now. Jerry Hayes, former Conservative MP, welcome to the mother of all talk shows.
George, it's good to speak to you, mate.
And you. Now, it's been a hell of a week for the Tories, Jerry. I don't know where to start. Shall we start with George Osborne?
Oh, George Osborne. Hello?
Yes, Gideon Osborne, the former Chancellor. The man who made such a good job of the British economy.
Now the Evening Standard editor. But has he ever edited anything? It's appalling.
I don't know. Has he ever even written anything, Jerry? He certainly never edited anything.
He used to write, William Hayes speeches. But of course, you've got Lebedev. We love him. You know, he might always give us work, so I'm not going to slag him off. But it's all a bit weird, isn't it? And George is getting £650,000 a year for, 1 day a month. which I think you and I would be pathetically grateful for.
Or even a mere fraction, even a mere fraction of it. We mustn't. We mustn't let green cheese sneak in here. Of course, a workman's worth his hire, and if the employer is prepared to pay that, well, good luck to him. But the question must be, Jerry, how can his constituents possibly tolerate a situation, not just a part-time MP, but an MP who's got about 6 other jobs?
I know, that is the problem. George, when you and I were in Parliament, we worked hard for our constituents. We did, because that's our job. No one gave a damn about what we thought about defence, foreign affairs, even the Palestinian question. They just wanted us with our middle-class education, with our bit of notepaper, to get them sorted out. George is more of a problem as me because, you know, he's earning an awful lot of money, and his constituents might say, how can you edit a newspaper? You know,
in London, whilst representing Cheshire.
Newspaper. It's a big newspaper. You can't do it for 2 hours a day properly. You've got to spend, 14 hours. So I think he's going to have problems on that, which is a great shame.
What about the pasty tax? No, I mean the national insurance, the latest budget debacle.
Complete cock-up. I mean, really. I mean, George, you were in Parliament at the same time as I was. You would have actually guessed that there would have been a little manifesto problem, which was on the side of buses.
Exactly,
you're attacking your opponent, and then the cabinet says, we didn't know what was going on. Oh, go away. And this is the problem with this government. There's a level of incompetence which is really, really scary. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, is even more hopeless. But that's not the point, because people in this country, our constituents, want them to be properly represented. Are they at the moment? Tricky one.
Well, it is, because she signed off this budget. It's all very well making Hammond the desiccated clerk, inky-fingered clerk. It's all very well hanging him out to dry over it, but the buck stops with her, Jerry. We know that. The Prime Minister has to approve the budget.
Well, of course, George, this is the most depressing thing. Didn't they see it coming? And don't forget, before the NIC, Nick-gate, if you can call it that way, look what happened before. There was this whole problem of what you're going to do with revaluing taxes in local government. What really screwed the Tories up in Scotland was revaluation, not the poll tax. And they suddenly thought, after 7 years, we are going to revalue, which is going to put everyone's tax up. And these are decent people. Now, hang on. Again, white van man, if you want to put it in a sort of colloquial thing, those are the people who the Tories represent. And we screwed them up. That is absolutely wrong. And why didn't they spot it? It's not difficult. Where are they off the radar, and why are they off the radar?
Then there was, just like London buses, 3 came along at once. Then there was the £70,000 fine from the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission making clear that the Prime Minister was being economical with the actuality when she said that they cooperated with the Electoral Commission, pointing out that they had to go to the High Court to get information out of the Conservative Party. And then there's the reports to the Director of Public Prosecutions, which might lead to a series of by-elections that the Tories might lose, and thus lose their majority, Jerry.
George, that won't happen. For God's sake, everyone knows, every political party always then busloads of people. Even, I suspect, your party, Respect, did exactly the same thing, although may be totally wrong. So they don't.
I wish we had the money to overspend in elections, Jerry.
No, for God's sake, people don't really care about that. When there's corruption, when there's real corruption, don't forget, in 2005, I represented 3 Labour councillors for corruptions in the postal voting fraud. Yeah, you can understand why the CPS will get involved. For God's sake, why didn't Jeremy Corbyn, I know he's totally incompetent, but why didn't he raise that in the House of Commons when it came out? Simply, they are all at it.
Well, so you think these 12 reports from 12 police authorities are all likely to be more or less empty and that there will be no question of prosecutions?
I don't know. I never comment on things that I haven't read the papers on, but I suspect it's unlikely. Is there, as you had in Tower Hamlets, serious fraud as it was decided? Have we got that? No. They've just been bussing loads of people, as everyone does. Get over it. The end.
Jerry, it's been a pleasure talking to you. A national treasure. Now, of course, a highly successful solicitor and a live wire MP when I knew him. Jerry, thanks for joining us. Coming up later in the programme, we'll head to Scotland and find out the view from north of the border about the second independence referendum. Well, you heard Jerry Hayes, a former Conservative MP. He agreed with me that the Osborne problem is going to be a big one for the Conservatives. I predict that Osborne will either have to relinquish the editorship of the Evening Standard or he will have to relinquish his position as a Member of Parliament. I don't believe that he can do both of those jobs. Jerry agreed with me that the budget U-turn was a complete balls up and speaks very, very powerfully to the levels of incompetence in the Tory cabinet, the Tory front bench. But he disagreed with me on the elections expenses scandal. He thinks that everybody is at it and that the reports to the prosecutor from 12 separate police forces are likely to lead to nothing. Well, he better hope that that's the case, because if it isn't, then there are some very interesting by-elections coming up. And if the Tories lose them, they don't have to lose many of them. Thanet, for example, is often described as at the epicentre of this. If there was a Thanet by-election with Nigel Farage seeking justice, claiming that he was cheated at the general election, would you put your money against Nigel Farage winning that seat? I certainly wouldn't. Let's hear from Ricardo in Glasgow on all these matters. Ricardo, welcome. He's not yet here. So let me go on. The tensions with Nicola Sturgeon are real, palpable. But I don't think that the SNP bluster will win out. If you say that we need a second referendum because Britain is leaving the European Union, then you'd better wait until Britain has left the European Union. Then the people can know what they're voting on. After all, the Scottish people might very well like the look of Britain's position after we leave the EU. The EU might not exist in the form that we know it in 2 years' time. There are too many imponderables, hypotheticals involved in having an early referendum. The Scots have a right to a referendum. They're in the Union entirely voluntarily and can leave it entirely voluntarily. And they can even break their promise to have a once-in-a-generation referendum. They can even do that. Hey, politicians of that kind normally do break their promises. But they can't force the British state to simultaneously negotiate with the European Union the terms of leaving and negotiate the situation in Scotland, because that would be a war on two fronts. We couldn't get through to Ricardo in Glasgow, but we've got Tina in London. Go ahead, Tina.
Good evening, George. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you. I'm slaying the snakes myself this evening.
Absolutely, we need to drive them out of Westminster, George, and I can't wait for you to be back in there and driving them out. I
Thank
just
you.
want to talk about Pasty Man and what is he doing? Is he massaging the unemployment figures for Philip Hammond taking 6 jobs? This job is an absolute absurdity, having this man in charge of the Evening Standard. And will he hold his government to account? I don't think so. And I look forward to seeing the papers tomorrow morning. I'm sure Corbyn will be blamed for this appointment. He's blamed for everything else that happened.
Or Vladimir Putin, now that I've revealed that the paper is owned by a Russian, perhaps there will be the Kremlin's hand in it. But it is, leaving aside the ludicrous situation where you're telling your constituents in Cheshire that they will not be disadvantaged in any way by all these gigantically paid jobs, heavy workload jobs that you've taken on, but on top of all that you're going to edit an important newspaper with a circulation of 1 million, and that they will not be disadvantaged. That simply can't hold up. What there is, though, Tina, and this may be what the game is, there is the possibility that he could use the Evening Standard for internal Tory party battles. He could use the Evening Standard against Theresa May, maybe try and push her out. After all, she sacked him. So maybe it's a move in the internal politics of the Conservative Party.
Of course. They're all snakes in a barrel, George, and they've got no loyalty to anyone but themselves, and that's absolutely, it's a career move. Gideon's not going anywhere, and he's just lining up a job for the old boys. It just shows you can be an average man and an average person and get to the top if you go to these elitist schools.
Well, it's not as if he was a great success as the Chancellor. I mean, he was one of the 2 leaders of a government that called a referendum and then lost it on the European Union, said they would cure Britain's debt problem, but actually ran up more debt than all Labour governments in history put together. He presided over austerity, savage cuts, pay freezes for public sector workers, and he left the economy in very parlous circumstances. I suppose you could say if he does to the Evening Standard what he did to the British economy, my friend Evgeny will be back in Russia before you could say Jack Robinson.
We can only hope. And take George with him.
And what did you make of Sadiq Khan rushing to say how wonderful this news was?
Sadiq Khan, is that the Mayor of London, the Labour Mayor of London?
It's the Labour Mayor of London who rushed into print to say how pleased he was that George Osborne was going to take on yet another job. You could make that up, could you?
You could, because I've met the guy and he's a toad, and that's what toads do. And I've walked the streets of London to get that man in, but I could not vote for him, so actually, George, I voted for you.
Thank you very much. Tina, if they know who you are, you'll be out of the Labour Party before you can say Evgeny Lebedev. Okay, thanks for that great image of a toad as Mayor of London, the toad of Toad Hall. Let's go to Ricardo, if we've got him, in Glasgow after the break. We're talking Tories, at least for the first hour, and I suspect it will go on and on. Tories from Gideon Osborne to whatever his name is, Hammond, Philip Hammond, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and those damned reports to the Director of Public Prosecutions about Tory overspending, or should I say under-recording, of their spending in a series of constituencies, and 12 police forces have submitted reports to the CPS. Let's hear from Ricardo in Glasgow. Ricardo, welcome.
Welcome to you again, George.
Good to hear from you. What would you like to say?
And happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone celebrating.
Thank you, my dear. Are you anywhere near Parkhead?
Well, you know, I'm out in the West, actually. I'm out in Maryhill, but I go out there frequently. Don't worry about that. I'll be in Copeland tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Go on.
You know, as a young man, St. Patrick was captured by pirates, George, and he lost his faith that he was forgiven, and he went on to live a good and pure life. And I think there's a lesson in that for all of us.
Indeed, pirates. Anyway, my Red Malacca, the good pirate story certainly has rumbled them up in the last few days. In fact, I'm on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan on Tuesday, talking about that very same. So tune in, Ricardo. Go ahead, sir.
I certainly will. Anyway, it looks like we're going to be the centre of attention again instead of the important things that should be the centre of attention. We know how this referendum is going to go, George. But I think we need to talk a little bit of sense. People like to talk about the Scottish nationalist wave as if it's been some sort of remarkable political movement. But, George, it's been completely overhyped. They talk it up to have been some sort of mania in Scotland, but history will remember it as a short-lasting, unsuccessful wave whose peak was one tiny majority in the Scottish Parliament and a significant number of Scottish people, but a minority vote in favour of separation. It was a deluded argument then, and then now it's a dying argument. And Nicola Sturgeon's, she's clinging on for, she's going out on a limb basically for a second referendum.
I think she might have made a gigantic strategic error, Ricardo, and she may even now realise that and may be backpedaling a bit because the position she's in. First of all, almost 2/3 of Scottish people don't want a second referendum.
That's right.
But those, if there is one, those that want to say no to separatism have grown. The latest poll in the Times, a Survation poll 2 days ago, put the no vote at 57, up from 55 in 2014 at the first referendum. And that can only grow, in my opinion, because what you're now asking the Scottish people to agree to is to leave Britain and join a queue to join the European Union, which they might never be allowed to join, leaving Scotland not in Britain and not in the EU either. And with no currency, none at all, because they couldn't use the pound. They can't go into the euro because going into the euro requires you to have no more than a 3% deficit in your GDP, and Scotland's is 9.9. That means 2/3 more than you're allowed to have, which means the literal decimations, more than decimation, destruction of Scotland's public services. And Scotland has an undue reliance on public sector jobs. Some 20% of Scottish people work in the public sector, which is twice as high as in the UK as a whole. So, I mean, do the maths. The Scottish people are not called canny for nothing.
Yeah, and on top of all that, they can't organise a government. They can't run a government, and more people are realising that. And by the next election, everyone will agree that they've had their chance and they've done next to nothing, and that any half-decent Scottish Labour leadership could run rings around them.
And there's the rub. Now, I had Brian Wilson on my television show last week or the week before, and he's a former Labour cabinet minister, a long-standing Scottish Labour MP, a lad of parts, as they say, and he made the point that the reason for the rise of the SNP is not just the increased popularity of Scottish nationalism, but it is more to do with the weakness of the Labour Party. And how weak. I mean, it is now the third party in Scotland. The Tories have got near enough double the support of Labour in the public opinion polls in Scotland. I can hardly believe I'm even saying those words, Ricardo.
George, it brings us on to one of the most important things happening in Scottish politics, and I think we do need to talk about Kezia. First off, at the last Scottish election, I thought the Labour manifesto was good because it was anti-austerity. There's plenty to shout about, plenty of progressive policy, but in the live television debates, she made a complete mess of selling it. This referendum,
she's third best. In fact, she might be fourth best.
Yeah, fourth best.
Yeah, I mean the Liberal is better than her.
I heard a better debater. Yes, yeah, he was. Well, then, anyway, this referendum might be a smokescreen to stop us talking about the issues for another 2 years. But Labour, I think, need to get their hands dirty and take advantage of it. I've met Kezia Dugdale, and I think she's a very nice, friendly, funny, genuine person. She's an honest person, a good person. She's even good in photo opportunities. But she ain't a leader. It's not that she's too young or inexperienced. It's that she's inarticulate. She's perceived as insincere, a little bit politically naive, blunders prone. A big one for Scottish voters is that she attached herself to Jim Murphy, who's the deputy leader. A big one for Scottish Labour members.
But she wasn't slow in pushing him off the plank.
Well, exactly. So,
I hear all you say, and I'm glad that you said it, because I didn't know any of that. I've never met her. When I left Scottish politics, when Blair expelled me from the Labour Party and then abolished my constituency just in case in 2005, well, I guess she was a schoolgirl at that point. And as you say, it's not about age, because the young man that's leading the Dutch Green Left, I don't know what age he is, but he looks about 24 or 25. He's just led the Dutch Greens. It's a new formation, the Green Left, and they've come from zero to being the biggest winners in the Dutch election. So I've got nothing against her being young, not at all. All I know is what I see and hear and read, and I'm not impressed. And I think that you've put your finger on the money there, that actually what Labour in Scotland needs is a leader. Somebody that is demonstrably a leader that people can rally behind, that people can look at and say, well, that person could run Scotland. That person could run the Scottish government. And she just is not that.
There are probably 3 Labour politicians in Holyrood who could be leaders. Their names are Richard Leonard, Alex Rowley, the deputy leader, and Neil Findlay. And when the time comes, and this referendum could be the opportunity, there should be a very friendly, consenting talk between them and Kezia Dugdale, giving her the chance to resign gracefully and take a senior position in the cabinet. I think she'd be an excellent education minister, for example. That's her specialist subject. I'd let her take her pick. I think she'd choose education because it seems to genuinely mean the world to her. If she was, and I hope she is, gracious enough to stand down, there would be a leadership election, and as long as they weren't foolish enough to stand against each other, those 3, any one of them would win ahead of an Anas Sarwar or a Jenny Mara or any of the Blairites in Holyrood. And George, that would have the SNP shaking in their boots. The crucial elements are the timing of the leadership changeover, and that it isn't done as a coup, but as a friendly, inclusive process that everyone can accept is for the good of Labour.
That sounds like the Labour Party I know. Friendly and inclusive. Negotiated.
Yeah.
Well, I just saw some pigs flying by the window here in Stoke. But you might be right. I hope you're right. Of course, the local elections coming up in May may break the back of the Scottish Labour Party. When I left Scotland, they controlled virtually every town hall, but now they're about to control precisely none, it would appear.
Yes, it's not looking good, but you know, I'm an optimist anyway, and I think, you know, with a bit of recording magic up here, I think it could actually Labour could, and you know, once people realise the SNP aren't doing a good job, the fundamental battle in Scottish politics is to bring matters of policy back into the forefront ahead of matters of constitution, which serve only to divide. This time maybe Scottish people will be ready to unite around the things that really matter.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. You're a wise man. You know what you're talking about. And I take your points about Kezia Dugdale. I don't want to be unfair to her. Not having ever met her, it would be wrong of me to give the impression that she was a bad person. But I'm absolutely sure she's a bad leader. Thanks, Ricardo, in Glasgow. In the second hour, we'll be going deeper into the George Osborne affair, or the Gideon Osborne affair. I was the first person to reveal, I think, on my old Talk Sports show. I revealed that his real name is, in fact, Gideon, and who knows why he decided to change it. Perhaps because it conjured up the image of a svelte, arrogant hypocrite in a bow tie and a dinner jacket at Downton Abbey, or dancing on the yacht with the Rothschilds and his other plush friends. Well, now he is going back into journalism. I say back into journalism because I've just been told that as a youth he dabbled in journalism. You could see the transition, dabbling in journalism as a youth to being editor of the London Evening Standard. You could see how it would work. We'll be talking to Ian Murray, a former newspaper editor and current board member of the Society of Editors, about Gideon Osborne's new gig. And then in the second half of the coming hour, we'll be talking to an old friend of mine, Kevin McKenna, a columnist and commentator for the Herald in Scotland and the Guardian, who knows a thing or two about Scottish politics and the struggle for Indie Ref 2. It's all coming up over the next 2 hours on the mother of all talk shows. Now, apparently I've been unfair to Gideon Osborne. He has, in fact, written quite a few things. In fact, as someone pointed out, he's never been short of a line or two. And he did write speeches for Tory grandees back in the day. And I think he did a bit of writing in the Oxford University newspaper. But it's a big step up from that to being the editor of a 1 million circulation newspaper. The London Evening Standard is not just a local paper. It is the only paper in the country's capital city. And because it's free, it has really a fantastically wide distribution. So I thought I'd talk to a man who knows what it's like to be a newspaper editor and also a current board member of the Society of Editors. He's Ian Murray, and he kindly agreed to join us. Ian, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
What's your first reaction to George Osborne's new position?
Well, I think my first reaction was after being in the journalism business for 39 years was, hang on a second, how did you get that job, George?
What first attracted Evgeny Lebedev to the multi-millionaire former Chancellor George Osborne?
Yes, absolutely. How did you get that job? And after that, I thought, well, very clever. A great coup in the sense of you're going to get all the headlines, aren't you? And certainly from a attracting advertisers' point of view, let's face it, yes, it has 1 million free circulation, and it's a bigger readership, of course, than that, because you've more people that read it than actually pick it up, and probably about three people per edition. And so therefore, to be able to say there's going to be huge interest in the next probably 6 months to a year, as people see what will the new editor do to this paper, that's a great thing to basically sell to advertisers. From an industry point of view, well, best of luck to him. In the newsroom, having edited newspapers on and off myself from my 20s, and now I'm in the wrong end of my 50s, I know that basically you have to hold that newsroom. You've got a bunch of very cynical guys and gals who are journalists, and you have to earn their respect. And that comes through, I've been there, I've done that, I've had my fingers burnt, and George hasn't. But good luck to him. He'll have a good team around him, let's face it, he'll have a good team around him. 2 jobs? At least 2 jobs? I mean,
he's got 5. There's 5 jobs plus being an MP. Yeah. He's got a job in America, as one of his constituents was just pointing out, which pays him £700,000 a year for 4 days a month as a consultant at BlackRock, the finance company.
Yeah.
And of course, he's got all his public speaking gigs, 650,000's worth there, and many others. So let me take you back to one of the important points you made there. You have to hold the newsroom. You have to actually be the editor. It's not like being the guest editor of the Today programme for a week, where you're actually just the lipstick. This is a sleeves rolled up kind of job. How can he conceivably do that with all his other tasks, Ian?
Well, it's a bit. I mean, let's face it. You don't get to be Chancellor of the Exchequer unless you are a very, very intelligent man,
or a good friend of the guy who happens to become the Prime Minister.
But we must accept that he is an intelligent guy, and he obviously can multitask on several fronts with that kind of thing. But being an editor is most certainly 24/7, and certainly the buck stops with you. So, I mean, throughout my time as editors, then I've been asked, what does an editor do? Usually by my MD or family. What do you do all day? And the answer is, well, an editor is basically the essence. It's basically you manage creativity. You are the soul of the paper or the publication or the website that you are. You direct it and you drive it forward, which means you have to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on. And I understand, from just what I understand, is that basically that Mr. Osborne is basically going to do his job as editor in the morning, and then in the afternoon he'll go and do his job as MP, and putting aside all the political impartialities necessary that's there, is that I'm sure that hopefully he understands that you don't just switch off at midday or whatever it is and then go and do your afternoon job. Being an editor is 24/7. You've got to keep your finger on the pulse. You've got to know what's going on. You've got to be able to talk to the newsroom about breaking news. And the whole element that comes into it of once you've gone to your afternoon job of being an MP, so who basically now, I would often say, when asked to join a committee or to join in with something, the answer would be, well, no, because I don't want you telling me things that I can't print. I don't want you telling me things that basically I can't, as an editor, then basically use, and you don't want to tell me things in that kind of way. So, but in his job as an MP, will he basically there find himself compromised in those kind of positions? Only, I'm sure they've had lots of discussions about all this.
Well, I mean, of all the objections, his political partiality is the least important to me because, frankly, I don't know of a newspaper editor anywhere who isn't a Tory. So the fact that he's just a more obvious Tory than the others doesn't make all that much difference to me. And it's fair to point out, isn't it, that there have been others. Some of them were charlatans. I don't want to compare George Osborne to the fellow in the early 20th century who went to jail as a fraudster. He was an editor of a Fleet Street newspaper. Horatio Bottomley was his name. But Gideon Osborne isn't Horatio Bottomley. But he might be comparable to Ian MacLeod, who quite successfully, it's said, edited The Spectator whilst remaining in Parliament. And of course, Boris Johnson, who wasn't an MP, but he was clearly in politics when he was part-time editor of The Spectator, and by all accounts did quite a good job of it. It's only fair to make these points, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, and the thing about being an editor is that you need to have a broad outlook and a broad spectrum. I think what we need to understand as well is that although the Evening Standard is quite rightfully seen as up there as a national paper, it is in many senses different. It is like the Manchester Evening News or the Southern Daily Echo in Southampton, which was my paper, writ large, in the sense that it has a geographical spread, and so therefore it must speak to as many people as possible in London. It has to have that broad spread that's basically there, and the editor, the person that's basically driving it forward, therefore has to have not just the confidence of the newsroom, but also the confidence of the readership that he's genuinely or she is genuinely speaking to as many people in the city as possible. Now, I'm sure that George Osborne is thinking that is going to be the way, but he must also know, and those who have appointed him must also know, that basically everything will be looked at now in the prism of, is this political bias towards the Tories, or is he trying to basically just prove his independent credentials, that he's basically swinging too far the other way? The time will tell. Time will tell about that.
You could make the argument, and let me predict this, and I may or may not be correct, The Standard is already a Tory paper. It backed the Tories in 2015 under Lebedev. It backed Zach Goldsmith against Sadiq Khan in his quite disgraceful election campaign for mayor last year. Both of those were positionally, given the political demographics of London, quite anti-commercial moves, in my opinion. So the Standard is already a Tory paper. Maybe, and I'm going out on a limb to predict this, knowing that and knowing who he is, Osborne will probably make more of an effort to be more inclusive and give more points of view a showing.
Well, I think that's for the new editor to decide how he reflects that there. I can't say whether I agree with you that the paper is, the Standard is a Tory paper. I've obviously followed avidly the comments and the tweets and the reaction on social media today to all of this, and quite a lot of that has been basically saying, well, this is quite a surprise because we see it as a liberal left wing paper that's there. So it's how you actually basically approach it. I think that the new editor is going to be going out of his way to ensure that he definitely presents an even field there, that basically that it is not veering towards the Tories. There's a lot of speculation, of course, about, this is just his revenge on Mrs May, on the Prime Minister, and he's now setting up a political camp there. I couldn't possibly say what that is. All I can say is that if Mr. Osborne believes that being an editor is something that you can do just in the morning and then pass on to something like being an MP and all these other jobs in the afternoon, I think he's in for a rude awakening.
Last question, Ian. Is there any sense of angst amongst journalists and out-of-work editors that this plum position has been given to someone entirely from outside the industry? Might there be a bit of gnashing of teeth over that?
Well, I can't speak for my colleagues elsewhere, but I thought it was a clever move in a sense from the Evening Standard and its owners, that basically this is something that's grabbed the headlines, and those who basically say that, well, newspapers have had their day and news and content is moving elsewhere. Well, yeah, okay, I think basically take another look at this. Angst, well, we'll see. I think we would be more concerned in the industry if in 6 months to a year's time he's made a cracking job of it.
Well, it's been a pleasure hearing your expert views. Thanks very much, Ian Murray, a former newspaper editor himself, currently a board member of the Society of Editors. Now, in the second half of the hour, of course, we'll be talking to another distinguished journalist, Kevin McKenna, on Scotland and the referendum. Go ahead, John.
Good evening, George.
Hi.
I just want your opinion on Donald Trump's first budget, where he has pretty much removed everything. 23 million people, what little bit of healthcare they had left is gone. Meals on Wheels, care for cancer patients, money for the Forestry Commission, all kinds of environmental, gone. And that money is being spent on weapons.
Yeah, 25% increase.
Do you think Donald Trump is gearing up for a war? Because in 1934, the German people were starving in the streets, and Hitler said we need bombs before butter.
I don't believe he's gearing up for a war. I think that he's caught in the maelstrom that his first 100 days of the presidency have become, where he's being bugged and burgled and subverted in every kind of way, where his own vice president is plotting with Hillary Clinton to get rid of him. He's too stupid, I think, to realize that all these billionaires and Goldman Sachs types that he's brought into the government have none, absolutely none, of the economic policies that he laid before the people and won on in the so-called Rust Belt states, where he promised the workers a different future to the one that was guaranteed if Hillary Clinton won. The workers rationally voted for what might be rather than what was definitely going to be, and he's betrayed them all, and he's not going to last. If he doesn't have any support amongst the working people of America and none of the support of the elite of America, well, he's done for.
Well, this is it, because the very people that voted for him are the very people that are getting shafted at the moment. And you've said in previous weeks, if he does this, capital I, capital F, in great big flaming 20-foot high letters, well, they are getting higher and higher and hotter every week. And
that's right.
And I believe, my own personal opinion, even though Americans are not in the habit of impeaching their presidents while still in office, Richard Milhouse is the exception on this. Donald J. Trump will be impeached by this time next year. Unless something dramatic happens, he's gone. He's finished.
I think he's definitely heading for the rocks. I don't know if the rocks will be that he'll just chuck it, as somebody said on the show, I think John Le Boutillier last week, whether he'll decide that actually this is too much hassle, or because his cabinet colleagues and his vice president will invoke, I think it's Article 25 or Amendment 25 to the Constitution, and decide that he's no longer capable of carrying out his duties and that the Vice President must take over, or that impeachment proceedings will go ahead. I would have thought that was the least likely of them, but one way or the other, if you don't have any support amongst the elite and you're betraying the base of the people who voted for you, well, you're done for.
Yeah. It seems to me that running a country is not like running a company, which is what he's done. And the very reasons why Donald Trump was elected by the working classes of America are fastly becoming the very reasons why he will be unfit for purpose.
I think we might be headed that way. Stay in touch, John, and we'll chart that course. If we're both right, we'll chart it, and it will be a fairly spectacular crash. Go ahead, Billy.
Now that Corbyn is in charge of the Labour Party, and I, for one, am someone who has recently joined, being at university, do you think in Scotland, because obviously I would say they rejected Blairite values, but do you think that they will now vote for Labour again?
Well, I think it's very difficult. The Scottish Labour leadership is utterly hostile to Corbyn. Scottish Labour Party members were the only part of the Labour Party that voted against him in the leadership challenge last summer. The perfectly reasonable statement that he made last weekend was rubbished by, amongst others, the Labour Party's single only MP in Scotland in the most vicious terms that would have got anyone else expelled from the Labour Party. But these people can do what they like with impunity because of the very difficult situation that Jeremy Corbyn finds himself in, which is in office but not in power. In the Labour Party, he has no power, just has the office. They've even cut his budget. The Blairites in the National Executive Committee have provided him with less than half of the members of staff that Ed Miliband had. Less than half. Can you believe that? So Corbyn's not in control of events, and therefore it's very difficult for him to impose himself on either, frankly, the British level or the Scottish level. The Scottish Labour leader is a Blairite par excellence, Kezia Dugdale, that we've been talking about earlier. So I really don't think so. Unless things change dramatically, Labour is set to lose every town hall, every city hall in Scotland in May, and after that, who knows what's going to happen. Certainly the weakness of the Labour Party in Scotland is the main reason why the SNP have the field more or less to themselves.
Yeah, but I went campaigning the other day. I'm obviously not in Scotland. The Malden constituency?
Yes.
That's something like 60% Tory. And I was campaigning, obviously, with the local Labour Party, and I'd say about half of people took leaflets, the anti-austerity leaflet that they printed, and half of people, roughly, I'd say, that were speaking to us. And a lot were old as well, so like Tories, sort of what you expect Tory voters. And they looked like they were going to vote for Corbyn. So I don't believe the media as such, because it's like that, what's her name, Laura Kussenberg, once the budget
for the BBC,
rubbished Corbyn straight away, ignored everything in the budget, and just attacked Corbyn.
Well, they were like I'd call them a pack, but really they're a herd of tethered goats in the British media, and from top to bottom, from the Times to the Daily Mirror, and everything in between. The only story. The only story for them on Wednesday was not that the Tories had made a complete cod of their budget, but that Jeremy Corbyn didn't ask a question or two questions more on the issue of NIC and the U-turn than they thought he ought to. They having Labour's best interests at heart, of course. And that narrative ran for 24 hours. And then, last night on Question Time, helped by the apostate Angela Eagle, that was further set up by the BBC, which has become just a branch office of the Tory government, and which actually encouraged, according to her husband, encouraged to be confrontational, a woman who stood up and started ranting and raving about Corbyn, who wasn't on the panel, wasn't on the agenda, and in relation to a completely different question. So the media assault on Corbyn is unconscionable, it's unprecedented, and it's unbearable. And I'm afraid that Corbyn's going to have to up his game if he's going to succeed in overcoming it, because you have to become an absolute populist outsider and get out of the bubble and attack these people as they should be attacked, and that way could lie success. In the Dutch elections that I followed closely, my wife is Dutch, from Amsterdam, the parties that won were the parties who were the outsiders. The Green Left, the Socialist Party, both got 13 seats, and the Labour Party, which was a Blair Labour Party, went from 29 seats to 9. And the Tories also lost ground. And Wilders, the far-right populist, he went up from 12 to 19. So the lesson is obvious, Billy. If you try to play inside the bubble, you're going to be burst, just like they were. It's the mother of all talk shows, only on Talk Radio. Now, I was talking just last week about the Scottish independence referendum. I campaigned in the last one. I was told it was the first and last in a generation, and I was a bit sad about that, because I quite like referendums. I keep on being on the winning side of them. But it turns out that the Indy Ref 2 is not going to be quite the generational gap that was earlier implied. That the SNP government, it's a minority government in the Scottish Parliament, wants to go either next year or early in the spring of 2019. The Prime Minister is saying you can have a referendum, but it will not be until after Brexit. You have, therefore, if not an irresistible force, then a powerful one, up against, if not an immovable object, one that has the strength of the British state around it. And so what will the outcome be? Let's hear from a man who knows a lot about Scottish politics. An old friend of mine, Kevin McKenna, columnist and commentator for the Herald in Scotland and for the Guardian newspaper in London. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hello, George. How are you?
Now, you and I have got a television date to celebrate something we agree on, which is
something more important than anything else.
Well, it's a fair point, actually. Kevin and I are Celtic supporters, and we have a TV date to discuss the 50 years since Celtic became the first British team to lift the European Cup. And on that we agree. On this we don't, Kevin. But let's have, as we always do, a civilised argument about it.
Of course.
The case that Nicola Sturgeon makes is that Brexit changes everything, and that therefore there needs to be another referendum, and that she got an electoral mandate for that in the SNP's manifesto. Now, it's my point is that the Scottish people have a right to a referendum on whether to leave the Union when they want one, because the Scottish people are a nation, they have rights of self-determination, and the only way you can measure realistically what the Scottish people want is through their Parliament, which is elected by proportional representation, is as close as you're going to get to the voice of the people. So it would have been a crime, and a dangerous one, if the Tories had said, no, there will be no referendum, because we only had one relatively recently. On the other hand, you could see the government's point, can't you, that whilst they're negotiating Brexit, it's a bit off, really, to open another front on their northern flank. What do you say?
Yeah, I can understand their fear about the prospect of fighting a war on two fronts. And don't forget the Irish situation either. That could be
That's
a war
true.
on three fronts.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can well understand Theresa May's reluctance, and not just because of the prospect of fighting a war on two fronts. She's got, this is a woman who is besieged at the moment. Her Chancellor's credibility is shot after that fiasco with the proposed increase in national insurance contributions for self-employed people. They took a complete U-turn on in record time. Brexit is still a shambles. Nearly 8-9 months on from June the 23rd. Nobody in the senior positions in government seem to know 9 months on what is happening, what their goals are, what their aims are, what it really means. You've got somebody like Liam Fox talking about this could be an opportunity to build another British Empire. So, yeah, Theresa May is besieged. She doesn't want this, but she can't. On one hand, say that we've all got to fight together at this crucial time to secure the best deal for Britain. Yada yada yada. And then for the last 6 months, she has refused to share any information with the Scottish Government. She has refused even to countenance a couple of, a few suggestions by Scotland, the Scottish Government, to talk about a possible separate deal for Scotland, given that Scotland had voted 62% to remain in Europe. And in fact, Nicola Sturgeon was saying the other day that she had not even been told by Theresa May when she intended to trigger Article 50. So on one hand, you've got Theresa May saying we all need to pull together to get the best possible deal, and therefore I can't countenance this proposed second independence referendum. But on the other hand, she's spent the last 8 or 9 months closing the door on the Scottish Government. She can't have it both ways.
Well, a set of powerful points there. But getting the best deal for Britain is in Scotland's interest on two levels. First of all, any Scottish referendum might vote to remain in the United Kingdom, and therefore the quality of the deal that's got is of importance for everybody. And
yes.
Secondly, if Scotland were to vote to leave Britain, it will still have Britain as a major customer, a major trading partner, and not to mention its next door neighbour, and therefore presumably wouldn't want Britain to be suffering from a bad deal. So objectively, everybody's got an interest in getting the best deal for Britain in the negotiations. Now, the suspicion is, I must tell you I share it, that one of the reasons why the SNP have brought forward this at this point is to encourage the European Union to drive a very bad deal with Britain, in the hope that that very bad deal will either scupper Britain leaving the European Union altogether or make independence more likely. What do you say?
I would say that's a touch paranoid. I think that there are other reasons being put forward by the Conservatives that might hold a little bit more water. I think the most common theme that I've heard in the last 24 hours is that, in fact, I think Theresa May said it today at the Tory conference in Wales, that according to her, it's clear all along that the SNP just wanted to use Brexit as a lever to bring forward another referendum. I would say it's a bit more complicated than that, apart from the fact that Scotland did vote quite clearly against leaving the European Union. We've had 2 elections in the last 2 years, one for Westminster in 2015, one for Holyrood in 2016. For the 2015 election, the SNP returned 56 out of 59 Scottish MPs, and in 2016 they polled 1 million votes, which was equivalent to about 47% of the total votes cast. And that is the first time in Scottish political history that any party has polled more than 1 million votes. And in both those elections, the SNP made it clear in their manifesto that they would be seeking a second referendum if there were to be a material change in the circumstances of the UK. Now, even the dogs in the street, even Conservative politicians in Westminster know that there's been a material set of circumstances. So in two polls, in fact, there's going to be a third one in May, which will be the Scottish Council elections, where the SNP will probably romp home too. So that's 3 polls will have returned a party which has put at the heart of its manifesto in all 3 a commitment to having a referendum because of a material change in circumstances. That's just called democracy. That, there's, in the absence of any other instrument to measure the will of a people, we have these things called elections. And inconvenient though it may be for the Conservative Party and also the Labour Party in Scotland, who now increasingly begin to resemble the Conservative Party, the Scottish people keep returning a party in large numbers who have said openly and honestly, we want a second referendum because...
Well, Kevin, again, all of that is true, although you should add the caveat that they were fighting a straw man in those elections, which that wasn't that difficult to knock down. But the point is not that there should not be a referendum. I'm very clear about this. The Scots have a right to leave the Union any time that they like. But we are only talking about a few extra months. I mean, at the outside of Sturgeon's demand, spring of 1919 is a matter of months. before Britain will leave the European Union, and then people will be able to see what they're voting for. Unfortunately, Kevin, capitalist messages beckon, and that has to be the end of our discussion. But I'm sure that we're going to continue it, at least after we've talked about Celtic.
We've got another 2 or 3 years of this, George.
We have. It'll not be our last talk. You're quite right. Kevin McKenna, great journalist up there in Scotland, columnist and commentator. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, my clever and beautiful wife, who's at home in London, not by my side, but due to give birth very soon, has pointed out that I made an error in my Dutch roundup earlier, because she's from Amsterdam and knows. And she points out that the Dutch Labour Party in the elections this week went from 38 seats to 9 seats. Now, this is happening across the European continent, that social democratic parties are falling. In fact, they're plummeting. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn is the only Social Democratic Party leader that has held anything remotely like an election-winning score. If Labour is on 26% now in the public opinion polls, in fact, in elections they do much better than 26% in local elections and in parliamentary elections and in mayoral elections, much, much better. But the French Social Democrats have had to give up the presidency after one term on 4% of the opinion polls Francois Hollande left the contest with. And in the Dutch example, 38 seats down to 9 seats. And my wife points out that in 1980, the Dutch Labour Party had 113,000 members, and in 2016, it had 46,000 members, well less than half what they had in 1980. Whereas, of course, Jeremy Corbyn has tripled the membership of the Labour Party in Britain. That's not enough, of course. There's no point in having lots of members and not many votes, but it's not a bad start. Here's David in Glasgow on the line to talk about Scotland. David, welcome.
Oh, to talk about Scotland and Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay, go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Parliamentary Labour Party are a very bizarre bunch. You know what I'm talking about? The thing is, Jeremy Corbyn was voted leader, right? And then he tried to oust him in his first year as leader.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a very stupid thing to do.
And by the way, David, Labour was equal to and in one poll ahead of the Tories when they launched this coup against Corbyn.
Of course. But even though like the first year now, even though that I would never vote Labour in Scotland, if I lived in England, right, and I seen the Parliamentary Labour Party trying to oust the recent democratically elected leader, I would have joined the Labour Party and voted Jeremy Corbyn. Mm-hmm. And then what he did was the following year, I think, they tried to oust him again. And that just
he's beat them. He's beat them twice, but don't put money against them trying again.
No, I don't think they will. They're stupid. Now the thing is, if they used their head at the start, they would have actually waited until halfway through the parliamentary generation, whatever, before you try to oust them instead of trying to do it straight away, because that would annoy a lot of people, right? And the thing is that Theresa May is playing a very dangerous game by attempting to enslave a parliament within a sovereign state.
Well, it isn't a sovereign state. It's not a sovereign state, David.
I'm talking within a sovereign state. She's trying to enslave a parliament within the wider sovereign state, UK.
That's a bit extreme, isn't it, David? All she's saying is instead...
Let me finish.
I'll let you back in. But I just want to pick you up on that point. That's a bit strong, isn't it? What she said is that the referendum should be held in 2020 instead of 2019. If you think that's enslavement, you've never seen real slavery.
Listen, let me explain. I'm talking in comparison to other parliaments. See Belgium, see this EU deal. You know the two regional parliaments in Belgium, they'll have a veto. See, when the Canadian Parliament, the main Parliament of Canada, was
the federal Parliament,
the federal Parliament was negotiating its deal with the European Union, all the provincial parliaments were involved, right? See the United States of America, right? See all the state parliaments, they have a real veto over the Congress, right? This is unknown in the world, that one central parliament is trying to basically, in the political sense, enslave another parliament. And when all is said and done,
David. First of all, you're not comparing apples with apples. All of those systems that you prayed in aid are completely different. Belgium and Canada and the United States and Britain all have different political systems. And secondly, you keep using this word enslaved. The government are saying you can have the referendum in 2020. And Nicola is saying, no, we demand it in 2019. Now, you're entitled to have a view on that, maybe even to be angry about that, but to call it enslavement, it's a bit extreme, Dave.
Sense. In the political sense. And see, when all is said and done, right, Theresa May were reminded that the Parliament of Great Britain is only created because the pre-17 Parliaments of Scotland and England created it. And when all is said and done, she won't be blocking any referendum. She will be respecting democracy, like Jeremy Corbyn has basically told her to respect democracy.
So what are you going to do then if she refuses?
She can't refuse. She'll just do.
No, she has already.
When all is said and done, she will be reminded that Parliament at Westminster only exists because the pre-1707 Parliament of Scotland and England created it. It's not just the English Parliament.
David, you can go back. David, you can go back 310 years if you like, but the facts are that 2 years ago, less than 3 years ago, the Scottish people voted 55 to 45 to remain in the United Kingdom. Now, you don't like that, but that's the facts. Now, if you're in the United Kingdom, that means you're subject to the decisions of the United Kingdom's Parliament, from which its government is drawn. Now, you might not like the stripe of the British government. Personally, I hate it. You might not respect the British Parliament. Personally, I hold it in utter contempt. But it is the Parliament, and they are the government. And unless you're here suggesting you're going to break out the guns, you're just going to have to accept it.
No one is suggesting about breaking out the guns. What I'm saying
you're saying it's not. You're saying they will not be able to stop a referendum.
See, in 1980, Maggie Thatcher, she was considered ruthless, and she was considered one of the most ruthless prime ministers in the history of prime ministers. And see, in the 1980s, she was asked the Scottish question, and this is what she said: the Scottish people do not need a referendum. All we need to do is send a majority of Scottish MPs down to Westminster, and they will have the mandate to negotiate.
That's true, actually. That's absolutely right. That used to be the official position in the British state. It was the SNP who said they wanted it to be decided by referendum, not a British government. It was the SNP who said that they would not go for independence without the backing in a referendum. So you're up a gum tree, Dave.
No, this is what Nicola Sturgeon said. Nicola Sturgeon said, it is not, I cannot unilaterally stop a referendum, right? Nor can...
No, I'm talking about Alex Salmond. I'm talking about the SNP under Alex Salmond. It was them. No, look, listen, I'm not going to let you obfuscate this point. It is the SNP that insisted that the only way we could have independence is on a referendum vote of the Scottish people. That was at a time, by the way, when they never imagined they'd have 56, or as it's now, 51 plus 5 suspended, 56 out of 59 MPs. If they'd known they were going to get that, they might not have gone down the referendum route, but they did go down it. and it's too late to get off it now, David. Anyway, it's been a pleasure, as always, disagreeing with you. That was David in Glasgow on Jeremy Corbyn and on Scotland, and giving you a taste of some of the cut and thrust that there undoubtedly is going to be over the next period. Now, they can huff and they can puff, but they will not blow the Westminster Parliament's house down, because the Westminster Parliament has the right to decide when that referendum can be. And when the only point of contention between the two is a matter of months, you cannot build that into a civil war type crisis. You cannot build that up into an existential crisis in the state. If she said, no, you're not going to have a referendum until 2027 or 2037, then you would have a real, genuine, existential crisis in the democracy of the state. But you cannot claim that the matter of a few months delay until Britain has actually left the European Union is something worth spilling blood or all that many tears over. I'm quite clear there must be another referendum, and I'm also quite clear that the Scottish nationalists are going to lose it for reasons which I shall adumbrate after the break and in the third hour of the mother of all talk shows. Let's go to Colin in Glasgow. Apologies to Asif in Surrey. We'll be on to you next. But Colin wants to directly respond to David in Glasgow, who was on just a few minutes ago. Colin, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. What would you like to say, Colin?
George, what can I say to that? The guy who's on before me, he says that, what is it? He said that politically enslaved. I see in Scotland, at this moment in time, I don't feel politically enslaved. I feel politically harassed. The SNP are doing this for their own benefit. So there's a petition that gets put out on Twitter on Tuesday. So that, and as of now, I've not looked at it recently, but as of now, there's almost 200,000.
Wow. I was about to say to you 100,000. I didn't know it was 200. Amazing.
Nearly 200,000 jobs to say that we don't want another referendum.
Well, the polls are clear, Colin, that almost 2/3 of the Scottish people don't want another referendum at this stage. And and by the way, Sturgeon is backtracking on Scotland joining the European Union for reasons that I explained she would in an article in Westminster online publication this week. That actually, if you're asking the Scottish people to choose to leave Britain and join the EU, then you're on a loser. You're just not going to win that argument.
I seen a report in the paper there. I've got two things to say, George. I seen a report in the paper the other day there that Sturgeon is willing to give up 40% of our fisheries to the EU.
Yeah.
So she is, if we get independence.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. And
there'll not be many votes for that in the northeast.
No, and another thing, George. It's a sad day that we don't have anybody up here representing us that are worthwhile representing us. And you know who I'm talking about, because I've been on the phone a couple of times to you, the Labour leader, Kaiser. So, my question to you, George, is when are you packing up and moving back to Scotland?
Well, I do spend a lot of time in Scotland, and I did offer to help them, but they turned it down. And so hell mend them, Colin. They turned it down most rudely. I will be campaigning in the referendum for another no vote, and I'll be no doubt welcomed by the same Labour people who couldn't fill a phone box themselves, but who will be happy that I'm in their constituencies rallying the no vote. The very same people that turned down my offer. It was an offer without any strings, an offer without any conditions. I was ready to help them, and they turned it down. And they're headed, I think, for oblivion. So, I'm prepared to go back to the Labour Party in Scotland, but only as their leader now, because they don't have a leader, and it's a leader that they lack. I don't mean leader in the Scottish Parliament. That should be Neil Findlay or Richard Leonard or Alex Rowley, because I've got no interest in being in Holyrood. But the leader of the campaign in the country, the leader of the campaign to rebuild Labour. That's what I'm talking about, Colin. And I was ready to do that. I'm still ready to do that. But there's no answer on the other side, I'm afraid.
And that's why they're in the state that they're in up here, the new jobs.
Well, I'm afraid it is, and even Brian Wilson, who is an old friend of mine, but we have many, many political disagreements, he said on my television show, I think it was last Saturday, that the real problem in Scotland is the weakness of the Labour Party, not the strength of the SNP.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I'm a Labour Party voter, George. Always have been. And you know, during the week there, George, and I kid you not, I almost turned to say to myself, when the next election comes, am I going to vote Tory for the very first time? How sad's that?
Oh, don't do that, Colin. But I understand I understand your frustration. I really do understand your frustration. And look, when I was first elected, Colin, to the Scottish Labour Party Executive Committee in 1975, Scotland was run by Labour. Every town hall, almost all parliamentary constituencies, its leader was Willie Ross, who acted and was effectively the King of Scotland. Labour was a powerful organisation with a mass trade union base, a big membership and a mass voting base. And it's all been thrown away. And the man I blame most of all, you'll not be surprised to hear, is Tony Blair. Tony Blair destroyed the Labour Party in Scotland, and yet the Blairites are still in charge of the Labour Party in Scotland.
It should have worked that out, George. Honestly, it's just no. Any sane person would realise that get rid of them.
Yeah.
You know, and put somebody that knows how to do the job properly in charge.
I don't even want paid for it. Just give me the job as campaign leader, campaign coordinator, and I'll go all over Scotland, filling halls in towns, cities, villages, rallying people to the anti-independence cause and to the cause of Labour, in which I still believe. I mean, what's not to accept in that?
It's perfectly reasonable, George, and you would get my vote. Let's put it that way.
Thanks, Colin. Appreciate that. Thanks very much for your call. Asif is in Surrey, and he wants to talk about George Osborne, and many, many people do. In fact, seems like the whole country is talking about George Osborne. So the Evening Standard has probably gained its first objective, which is to have everyone talking about the Evening Standard. Asif, go ahead, sir.
Well, it was a massive misjudgment by George Osborne to take this job. And if you predicted that he'd have to give up either his MP status or the editorship, I think even if he gives up the MP status, he'll still have to step down as editor, because when he addressed the journalists today for the first time in the Standard newsroom, the cameras were there, and he went down like a lead balloon. They looked as supportive of him as the Labour PLP do of Corbyn.
As bad as that, was it?
As bad as that, as you would say, like the rope supports the hanging man. And when you walk into a situation like that, you can turn it around if you show your peers and your underlings, for want of a better word, that you work hard, you are in sort of meritocratic deserving of being an editor, being a hard worker, a journalist, taking an editorial line. But I don't think he'll do that either, even if he was the nicest bloke in the world, because imagine if you're a journalist on the Standard and you want to speak to your editor, but you hear that he's working at BlackRock for
in the US. He's not even in Westminster being an MP. He's in New York working for BlackRock this week.
It's not a sustainable situation, and it
isn't really. I mean, what his constituents? I mean, we heard some vox pops from his constituency, which I know quite well. Two of my children live there. What are his constituents saying about this? The fact is the man that they ought to be able to be in direct touch with on any given day of the year, and that's what people demand of their MP, is not just not in Parliament. He's not just not in Cheshire. He's not in Parliament. He's not in the Evening Standard. He's in America, working for £700,000 a year for 4 days a month. I mean, how would you feel if you were a constituent there?
Incredibly let down, but it just shows you how out of touch with reality he is. This is part of his great game, to get back in power, to eventually become Prime Minister again. I don't understand why he's doing this, and it's a massive mistake, and it's
not even as if he was any good as the Chancellor. Yeah. I mean, even looked at objectively, if I take off my red-tinted glasses here, looked at objectively, he was a disaster as the Chancellor. He multiplied Britain's indebtedness. He made us suffer for 8 years of austerity, which we're still suffering, and it had no positive effect at all. And all the while, he was living the life of Riley. Who was Riley, by the way? I don't know why I say that. He was living the life of Riley, tripping the light fantastic on the deck of the Rothschilds' yacht, sailing around the Greek islands with Peter Mandelson, having fun, or what passes for fun in his circles, doing God knows what. He was a brothel creeper. He was a lounge lizard. He was a Bollinger man. And all the while, the British economy was going to the dogs. And yet people are prepared to employ him and pay him to hear him speak. By the way, he's the world's worst speaker. Have I been too harsh on him, Asif?
No, I think Tony Blair's slightly worse, personally. But
of course.
No, I completely...
There's nobody worse. Shaitan is the only person worse than Tony Blair. But but George Osborne is a poor man's Tony Blair.
Sure, and he's going to have a hostile... I mean, I don't like mainstream media journalists. I don't have much sympathy for them at all, mainly because of the way they attack you. But the Twitterati have been up in arms, at this guy being parachuted in. So I think the rest of Fleet Street, or whatever they are called now, will be against him. And he won't be able to, and all the Rothschilds and all the money won't be able to help him. That he'll have the pincer movement of his own constituents, public opinion, and journalistic opinion, and I don't think that's a good mix.
Very beautiful call. Thank you, Asif. God bless you. Thanks very much indeed. Johnny in Surrey on Scotland. Go ahead, Johnny.
Hi, George. I wanted to say that I'm opposed to another referendum because of the fact that there aren't any legitimate grounds for it. We had one in 2014, just a couple of years ago, and the SNP seem to want to have referendums until they get the right result. I mean, the grounds for having this referendum are completely false. This idea Scotland was taken out of the EU against its will. Scotland is not an independent country. It's part of the United Kingdom. Everybody took part in the referendum on the understanding that the whole of this would affect the whole of the UK, and that we would go along with the will of the whole of the UK. So her whole grounds, I think, are false. And also, I think it's very undemocratic to have a referendum and then have one a couple of years later, because it's just it gives a great advantage, really, to the people that want to leave, that they can keep on having referendums until they get the right result. I think if you have a referendum on Scottish independence, of course you can have another one, but you should wait about 10 years or something of that length.
Well, look, the thing that they would most like, Johnny, is that a parliament in London refused the Scottish people a referendum. So you have to box clever in this. If you refuse a nation, you said it's not an independent country, that's true, but it is a nation that is voluntarily in a union with other nations in this state. And if you want it to remain that way, then you have to box clever. You have to not be inflammatory, make incendiary comments, because you'll only make the situation worse. And I think you're quite wrong. If you go back and back and back to the well, you're going to find the support drying up rather than filling up. And it will be subject to the law of diminishing returns. I'm absolutely convinced, and I'm not often wrong, as you obviously know if you're a regular listener. I'm absolutely convinced that the majority against separation will be bigger when the next referendum comes than it was last time. And that probably will be an end to it for a very long time. Certainly be an end to Nicola Sturgeon. So just keep in your mind, and I say this to all English people, don't intervene in this debate in a way that they want you to, that the Scottish nationalists want you to. They want the kind of things that were said at BBC Question Time in Bognor Regis last night. They want people to insult the Scots. They want them to demand that there should be no referendum. That's what Nicola Sturgeon wants. So follow people who know what they're talking about here. That's all I'm saying, Johnny. Thanks very much for the call. Let's go to Annan in Scotland and hear from Lewis. I've not often been to Annan, which is in the county of Dumfries and Galloway, which has a certain resonance for me. Lewis, welcome.
Hello there, first time caller. Love the show.
Thank you.
I'm pretty new listener as well, pretty much. So you've got Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP now want to go for another referendum. But to me, the problem is that last year they got re-elected. They got 46.5% of the vote, but it was only on a 55.6% turnout.
Yeah, they've got the support of about 25% of the Scottish people.
Yeah, and then if you go to the EU referendum, it was something like 37% of SNP supporters voted to leave the EU.
Including some of the leaders, Lewis.
Yeah, yes, I'd heard about that as well. And it's just, you've got this, and it says that 2/3 of people do not want another referendum, me being one of them. But I think the way they're pushing on, AM1, they don't have a mandate at this precise moment. I don't think they would win.
Well, Lewis, let me stop you there. I'll let you back in. They're depending on the vote of the Greens, who committed themselves before the last Scottish parliamentary election not to have a second independence referendum in this kind of time span. So actually the Green Party, if they vote for a new referendum, are breaking their own electoral mandate. Did you know that?
I did, yeah, I did. And the thing that really got to me was when they said it was once in a generation, both, the SNP as well, and I say the Greens are now breaking their manifesto. And I personally think that by the time we get to another referendum, I think the vote will be quite comfortably against.
I'm sure of that. I predicted last time, you may recall, on the Sunday before the poll, on Andrew Neil's Sunday Politics in Edinburgh. It's there on YouTube. He asked me, what do you think the result's going to be? I said 55-45. And it was exactly 55-45. So hear me now. It will be bigger than 55-45. It could even reach 60-40. And if it did, that would be the end of Nicola Sturgeon, and there then wouldn't be another referendum for a generation.
I personally, I don't understand. There seems to be a lot of people that are against independence, but they will vote SNP. To me, the SNP, if they keep doing this, if Labour get a worthy leadership, then I think the SNP could be in trouble.
Well, I think myself that we've reached peak SNP. We've passed peak SNP. And the biggest problem is the lack of a Labour alternative. But I've spoken about that too much this evening already. Look, it's more complicated even than that, Lewis. First of all, to vote for independence now, you would have to be in favour of leaving Britain and in favour of applying to join the EU. Now, the problem with that is 37% of SNP voters voted to leave the EU. And many of them, I'll say most of them, would not vote for independence if it meant joining the EU. In other words, they wouldn't prioritise independence over their feelings on the EU. And then when you start talking about asking to join the euro, meeting the terms of joining the euro, accepting free movement of East European labour into Scotland, all the East European labour that couldn't get into England would now have to come to Scotland. Well, just frankly, it's ridiculous. The standard of Scottish football would go up because you'd get a lot of Croatian, Slovakian, Romanian, Bulgarian, Slovenian footballers coming to Scotland, but you'd get lots of other people that wouldn't be able to get jobs, would be competing with Scottish workers for jobs, helping to drive Scottish wages down even further, and putting increased pressure on public services in Scotland, of houses and health and schools and so on. So once you put that in front of the Scottish people, trust me, there's not going to be many takers for that.
I mean, I, for one, would not take it. But the other thing is that Nicola Sturgeon talks about remaining in the EU. We talked about the uncertainty of currency. But if memory serves me right now, if you go into the EU, now the rules state you have to take the euro. And
you have to?
Yeah, I'm sure it's the rules.
It is. Also, all new members have to join the euro. But to join the euro, you have to meet the convergence criterion, the most important of which is that your budget deficit must be no more than 3% of your GDP, and Scotland's is 9.9%.
And she doesn't even have the guarantee that we would get back into the EU.
I don't believe that Scotland would get back into the EU. I believe that Spain, amongst many others, would veto it.
I believe they would as well, and I must say that's one of the reasons why I do not believe there should be a second referendum. And I would.
You've put your point very powerfully. You said it was your first call. It didn't sound like it. Don't be a stranger. Come back regularly. Charlie's in Dunfermline. Let me go back there.
Hello there,
Charlie.
hello there.
Long time since I was in Dunfermline, son.
Ah, it's a lovely, lovely party fife.
It is. I played at East End Park. Is that still there?
Of course it is, yes. Of course, the bars, yes. They're still there.
I've got a soft spot for them. Anyway, Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I've spoke to you, George, and to be honest with you, I've always been I mean, I don't always agree with everything you say, but I've always been a fan of you. You're a great speaker, and watching you in Parliament years gone by has just been a treat.
Thanks, mate. Is there a butt coming here, Charlie? Is there a butt coming?
I mean, George, I'm tired. I'm tired, man. I'm a yes voter, and I always will be a Scottish independence voter. I've got a lot of views on Scottish independence. I've got a lot of negative views on Westminster. It's not the English people. It's not the Welsh or the Irish. To me, it's to point us in the right the direction that we want to go. Now, obviously, if there is a vote and if it's a no, then that's the way we go. But for me, my views are, I just don't like the way Westminster's working for.
No, neither do I. I'm not in second place to you on that.
As well as England as well, because England, I mean, who speaks for the English people? You know, it's.
Well, I'm here in Stoke, Charlie, and I can tell you that you have more in common with the working people here in Stoke than you do with the working people in Bulgaria. You just do.
I mean, I'm not.
You've
I'm
got
not
a shared history.
I'm not a big fan of the EU. I'm not. I'm not one of these.
You're one of the people I was. You're one of the people I was talking about a minute ago.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who want independence but don't want the EU, but under Nicola Sturgeon's plan, you're leaving Britain so you can join the EU. You see my point?
Oh yes, I've seen. Look, I've been talking to all my friends up here in Dunfermline, all that are against and all that's for, and I say exactly the same thing to every single one. I'm no big fan of the EU. I'm no big fan of SNP and their policies or the way they've run Scotland over. I mean, there's a lot of good they've done, but there's also been a lot of bad, like every government at the end of the day. But for me, I would like your opinion on, and I would hope you would be honest with me, I would like your opinion on Scotland and all the other home nations, whether Wales wants to stay with part of England in some sort of fashion. Is there anything good that could come out of that, in your opinion?
Yes. First of all, I'm against the partition of small islands. That's why I oppose the partition of Ireland. I believe in unity. As far as is practical, we need to have people living and sharing sovereignty in the state. And therefore, the north of Ireland is a monstrosity to me. It's an entirely fabricated, false, fake entity. And the sooner the Irish people unite and get rid of that partition, the better. But I'm not going to support an end to partition in Ireland in order to partition Britain. Britain is another small island of English-speaking people with overwhelming similarities of language and culture and economy and history. And to break it up is just a bad idea to me. It would leave everybody poorer. It would leave Dunfermline poorer. It would leave Stoke poorer. It would leave the rich just as rich in Scotland as in England as they are now, or in many cases more rich, but it wouldn't do anything for ordinary working people. I support a federal Britain, where the federal parliament in London deals only with defence, foreign affairs, and national strategic economic issues, and everything else is dealt with at the level of Edinburgh and Wales. That seems to me the best of both worlds.
Yeah, including landlocked resources in Scotland. Is that what you're saying there? Would that be the kind of federal...
It depends. I don't have time to define nationally strategic, but nationally strategic economic issues like railways, like oil, if that's what you're asking. These are nationally strategic issues. But every other thing can and should be dealt with at the Edinburgh and Cardiff levels. And then we get all the benefits of staying together, and you get, and Wales gets, all the benefits of that ultimate in devolution, namely a federal system. I need to press on, Charlie, because I've got a lot of people. But it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much for ringing. Let me tell you what's on the front page of The Guardian. This is The Guardian, not me. Osborne, an editor of Substance. What substance? Crystal meth? Oh, I can't wait to read that. I thought I was going out on a limb. John in Glasgow, on Scotland. Go ahead, John.
Hello, George.
Hi.
The significance of this week being the Ides of March and the passing of the EU exit bill.
Beware the Ides of March. I never thought of that one, John. That'll be why Nicola had her knife out.
That's right. There wasn't a soothsayer there to tell her that Alex Salmon and Nicola Sturgeon and the other 60 conspirators were there in wait. but you correctly identified that, and the mood was palpable on Question Time, that the mood of betrayal and treachery, but it does play into their hands.
Oh, definitely.
And I would urge every man, woman, and child in England, of the 60 million of the 66 million in this island, to get in your cars, get in your trains, get in your planes over the next year and a half, and get up here at Easter, in the summer, in the autumn. It's your island. You're entitled to come up here and take your island back, because the SNP are not Scotland.
No, I think this is really important, and the media plays into this this stereotype. I mean, I'm seeing headlines like, Theresa May at war with the Scots. That's not true. First of all, 25% of the Scots vote Tory. But secondly, they're at war with the SNP, not with the Scots. Almost 2/3 of the Scots don't want a referendum. If there is a referendum, 57% of the Scots are going to vote no. So don't play into the SNP's battle in that sense.
No, this week, and I've been out and about. I mean, okay, I don't sit inside all the time. Maybe I should go out even more to find them. But I haven't found anybody, even amongst people who are even SNP's supporters or voted yes last time round, who are gagging for this other referendum. The truth of the matter is that Nicola Sturgeon's sell-by date is May 2021, the next Scottish Parliament elections. This is her last chance. She's seen a main chance, and she's decided to go for it, whatever. There will be a degree of weakness in the British state while all this negotiations are taking place, and it is extremely opportunistic. And a lot of people. It's
England's difficulty is Scotland's opportunity. That's the strategy that they are following. But I believe it's fatally flawed because it depends upon people who voted to remain in the European Union, but are against Scottish independence. Brian Wilson, I've spoken about him several times. He was on my show last week on television. He voted to remain in the European Union, but you couldn't be more against Scottish independence than him. Yet she's using his vote to remain as a reason for having another referendum, saying 60% of the Scots wanted to remain in the European Union. Therefore, we need another independence referendum. But hundreds of thousands of people who voted to remain in the EU are against Scottish independence. And 37% of the SNP's vote is against the EU, including Jim Sillars, who said that he will not vote for Scottish independence if it means an independent Scotland joining the EU. They're in, I believe, very, very deep strategic trouble.
Indeed. And that's where it's at. I think they've bit off just a bit too much this time round, and there is a certain anger in the mood up here, and it's particularly amongst the people that you've identified. All those people, all these Liberal, Democrat, Labour, Conservative people who were no voters in the referendum in 2014 but were Remain voters just last year, have had their votes hijacked, and they don't like it.
John, as always, very powerful and to the point. John in Glasgow. Let me try and do justice to those hanging on the line. Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. Not many women callers tonight.
No, in fact, none. But you are the princess of women callers. You are the almost legend, Norma in Bristol. Go ahead.
Well, I'm very annoyed about George Osborne. I mean, really, he shouldn't be allowed both jobs.
It's a provocation, really. I think it's backfiring on the Tories big time.
Well, I was thinking if Parliament had the same hours as teachers, because they have similar holidays, he couldn't take this new responsible job of being editor of the Evening Standard. And I mean, he's got these constituents in Cheshire.
Well, it's a full-time job during the day. I presented TV shows when I was an MP, radio shows, but they were at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and they were on Saturday afternoons. They were in my own time. They weren't in the public's time when I was being paid to be an MP.
I mean, how can he do his Friday surgeries to serve the people of Cheshire? It's just not possible, really.
He probably has his surgery in the Ritz or in the Claridge's. You've probably got to come down to London to have a surgery with him.
He's so arrogant, he really is. And
he's unbelievably arrogant. And he's from that group, that caste of Bullingdon boys, Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Gideon Osborne, whose idea of fun used to be throwing bread rolls at the waiters in the restaurants that they took over in their fancy dress. They think they're born to rule, these people.
Yeah. Well,
and they think they can do anything that they like.
Yeah, he's not going to have a happy ending. But just quickly, George.
I think he likes a happy ending. I think he's had a few happy endings, Norma.
Oh, well, he's not going to live that long and have happy endings. I mean, he lived long, but he don't think it'll all be happy. Just quickly, George, I know you won't like this particularly because, well, not like it, but I'm listening to you, And I'm watching Bristol City win 4-0 tonight to get out of the relegation zone against Huddersfield.
Who have they beaten?
Huddersfield.
Oh,
And
Huddersfield were going good too. They were going well.
Yeah. And Bristol City were on relegation, and I am a Bristol girl, and they're winning 4-0.
Okay,
So
well,
I'm
the
happy
very
about
best
that.
of luck, and congratulations to Bristol City. Thank you very much.
Thank
Been
you.
a pleasure as always, lovely Norma. Let's go to Robert in London on unions, the media and the BBC. What could go wrong? Go ahead, Robert.
That's quite a scoreline, actually. But yeah, firstly, happy St. Patrick's Day, George.
And to you, thank you very much.
Yes. Talk about St. Patrick's Day. We could be in a situation where Northern Ireland leaves Britain, leaves Britain. And the reason why
Well, it's not in Britain, leaves the United Kingdom,
leaves United Kingdom,
which it has been falsely included in under threat of violence and by military occupation.
Yes, whether that's obviously that's true. I was going to say that the reason why we will end up leaving partially is because of the way, say, the BBC and the media have covered stories in other parts of the nation, or have failed to cover stories in other parts of the nation. For example, you've got issues like what's going on in Scotland, which nobody in England knows about and can't really hold the Scottish people to the Scottish government to account in it. I remember during the leaders debate where Nicola Sturgeon just breezed through the election debates because, frankly, none of the other leaders could really call her out or anything. And then you've got about the way, I go after the BBC on this bit in particular because they're funded by taxpayers. You'd think it'd be in their interest to cover big stories in other parts of the nation. So, for example, in Northern Ireland, for example, you've got this massive issue in regards to what's going to happen between them and Ireland, which is not something to be sniffed at. It's a very serious issue. And then you've got about what's been going on in the Northern Irish government, whereby pretty soon it seems as if there's not going to be a breakthrough between I can't remember the name, Arlene Foster, and the other parties in Northern Ireland. You'd think that the BBC and other media organisations would be, if they wanted to foster a sense of nationhood or a sense of a shared sort of shared news, a shared culture, you'd think they want to cover it properly. And it just seems to me inevitable that as this continues, that the nation will tend to fracture.
Well, first of all, I don't regard us as a nation. We are a country, a state. We are different nations in one state, which is something that every nation has to agree to, and has to continue to agree to. It's not like the United States of America, where everybody is an American, and but they might live in California or they might live in Minnesota. In this case, this is a living, breathing union of different nations, and people have to continue to want that, and if they don't want it, they have to have a mechanism to leave it. Now, the issue in the north of Ireland is, of course, very, very much different historically. Scotland voluntarily joined a union with England. It was not colonised by England. It was not part of an English empire. On the contrary, Scotland and England made a colony of the world. They went out into the world and colonised it. And Scotland was in the front rank of that. So Scotland cannot be compared to Ireland. It is an entirely different historical example. In fact, Scotland colonised Ireland before the English and the Scots came together in the middle 17th century, before the Union. Scotland invaded and occupied part of Ireland. So the idea that Scotland and Ireland are analogous as both colonies of England is completely untrue. So the only argument there after, if Scotland is not a colony, is not an oppressed nation, then what is the argument for breaking up with the people of Liverpool or Stoke, where I'm sitting now? Especially when the plan is to leave Liverpool for Latvia, to leave Stoke for Sweden. That just doesn't make any sense. Do you get me, Robert?
Oh yeah, no, I agree with that. I was more talking about the way when I said about the media, I meant in terms of if they wanted to foster a sense of us being a country, so to speak.
No, I agree. It's very very London-centric, very Westminster-centric.
We don't hear anything from other regions, so
no, I agree. By the way, that's true even of the regions of England.
Yes. Big news stories, and big news stories basically go unreported, and it's like, well, if we're supposed to be a country, it's no wonder you turn London against Middlesbrough or Middlesbrough against Berwick. Well, that's still northeast. Dundee.
Well, you're absolutely right, Robert. Pleasure talking to you again, my friend. Let me go for what I think will be the last call. That's Mal in Belfast. Go ahead, Mal.
Hi. Yeah, Matt. How you doing, George? I'm just confused about the way your view and the way that Great Britain's set up. Right, you've got four countries: Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. Okay, on one hand, you say that Scotland should stay with Britain and not enter the euro. But on the other hand, you're saying that Northern Ireland is an abomination, right, and it should join with Ireland, spend the euro, and enter the European Union. Those two things don't match up to me. How can
well, they do. They do. The key word is unity. I believe in Irish unity, and I believe in British unity. What's not to understand about that?
Yeah, but Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and they won't stay in the UK.
Look, you call it Northern Ireland. I don't call it Northern Ireland. I call it the occupied 6 counties of the north of Ireland. I don't recognise anything called Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland was carved out of Ireland by British imperialism in defiance of the overwhelming majority of the Irish people, north and south.
Scotland was overtaken as well, but one had you.
No, it wasn't. You see, I knew they were on that, and it's completely wrong. Scotland was not. Mal, I'll let you back in, Mal. I'll let you back in. Mal, I'll let you back in, I promise. Scotland was not taken over by England. It was not invaded. It was not occupied. It voluntarily joined a union between Scotland and England in 1707. And the next centuries were Scotland and England going around the world colonising everybody else. Scotland was not a victim of the empire. It was a part of the colonial venture, a part of the empire. That is not analogous to Ireland at all.
I know, but in this day and age, you can't say that Scotland, on any means, should re-enter the euro, because it would be a big mistake. But you're saying
I think it would be a very big mistake, Scotland joining the euro. And guess what? But Mal, guess what? About 75% of the Scottish people are against joining the euro. So that's the reason for not joining the euro.
Well, why should Northern Ireland then leave Britain to enter the euro?
I'm not asking you to leave Britain. You're not in Britain. Northern Ireland, as you call it, is not in Britain. It's never been in Britain. It's in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. No, but you keep saying Britain. You mustn't confuse these things. Because Britain is an island entire unto itself. Ireland is an island entire unto itself. One small part of it was stolen from the Irish people and kept in bondage. One green field kept in bondage all this time. And its time is coming to an end. The Irish people, Protestant and Catholic, can increasingly see the obvious benefits of unification of all people in Ireland
Europe, so that would be a good thing for Northern Ireland to join with Ireland and enter Europe. I'm
not asking you. You keep using these terms, Mal, that I reject. Join with Ireland. They are in Ireland. Look at your map.
In Europe.
I'm not asking you to join in Ireland. I'm saying the Irish people will, and it's coming yet and not far distant, decide that, well, we actually are in Ireland. We actually are Irish. And the sensible thing to do...
I'm Irish, I'm British.
Well, you may be... You're not British. Mal, trust me on this. You are not British. No, Mal, you're not British. The British don't think you're British. You're on the map, you're not British. On your passport, you're not British. You are not British.